Hey guys, it's Gary, back again, probably sooner than you expected with another video. Hope everybody's doing well out there. Based on my last video that I did, I got the idea for something that I wanted to do. I didn't know if it would really be worth it, but I'm just going to go ahead and do it anyway. And that is show my collection of Two-Fers, vinyl albums. That were, looking into it, I hadn't really done a lot of history on them. When I got into jazz, and these are all jazz, I'm not aware of any other musical genre that really did these Two-Fer collections. I started getting into jazz in the late '70s, and apparently when I started getting into jazz, the series had only really started a few years prior. So there was a lot of available albums that were in these Two-Fer packaging. And that is basically what they are reissues of older jazz albums. But instead of just reissuing them or changing the cover, which is something that they used to do to single albums a lot as the years went by, I guess, they decided to package two different albums, two different sessions, together. And generally they were the price point, which was the thing that really attracted buyers like myself, was the fact that they were generally only $1 more than a regular single album release. So if a new release was going for like $7.99 at a discount store, these might be like $8.99. And my impression, which was incorrect, was that these Two-Fers were around for a long time. But looking at the dates on the albums that I have, it seems like they pretty much had a shelf life of roughly about 10 years, and that was it. So it's entirely possible that you would have missed these. It was probably a good idea. It was probably a good idea because in the jazz world is not the pop world in terms of the amount of sales. So a lot of these jazz albums have been out for a number of years and decades. A lot of these are from the 1950s, for instance, and they have been out in their original incarnation as a single album for many years. In some cases, they had even gone out of print. In other cases, they were still in print in the old original 12-inch LP format, but maybe the sales were dropping off, so they decided maybe we can get some more sales here by packaging two albums together by the same artist and offering them at a discount price, at a better price. And as I've mentioned before, the things that I personally love about them is that they would all have new artwork, which wasn't the thing that really attracted me to them. The thing that attracted me to it was a couple things. They all, for the most part, were very rich in liner notes. So instead of just throwing together a new cover and packaging the two albums together, the liner notes in a lot of the cases were very detailed about the historical significance of the albums that were included in the sessions in this package, how important they were to the artist's development, whether they were popular or not with the general public, maybe how the musicians got along, any number of things. But with the hindsight of often 20 years or more of the history of that artist, there was a lot of information there that obviously was not available, and history that hadn't happened yet when the album was new and when it came out. So it was a great introduction. When I started getting into jazz, at first it was all the ECM artists, and then I started branching out a bit. And it wasn't unlikely for me to pick up a Bill Evans, which I showed in my last video, and I have here again. And Who's the Sidemen are two guys that I was already familiar with early in their career. Paul Motion on drums and Gary Peacock on bass, who had done work as both of them as leaders on their own in later years on ECM records. So there was even some carryover to artists a bit that I was familiar with, and others that I just knew. Well, I know Bill Evans is a jazz giant. I don't have anything by him. Where do you start? And really, all these artists had a ton of releases. The nice thing with the Two-Fers as well, besides the price point and the fact that you had the history of the artist, is that if you're going to go investigate an artist that you really know nothing about, and this is before the internet, before you could really read reviews of the albums, to get a feel for them, everything was pretty much a blind buy. And you could always pick up, if you're just kind of randomly choosing an album by an artist to listen to for the first time, it's entirely possible that you could pick up something that was not representative of that artist, and based on that one album say, oh man, this guy sucks, I'm not going to buy any more of his records. So the nice thing with the Two-Fers was that you got twice as much material and a better chance at getting a representation of the artist's work. Because a lot of the times, they didn't necessarily package together two sessions that were necessarily close to each other, like one after the other. Sometimes it was a gap of many years between the two sessions, but the records were complete. They were the complete original albums. And you could also get to hear different settings. For instance, Bill Evans in his piano trio, bass and drum setting, but also in a duo with Jim Hall, the guitarist. Great introduction to Bill Evans. And I showed this one in my last video, but which is the thing that got me, into the whole idea here, really. But here's a perfect example: newly commissioned artwork. This was not on either of the albums, Intermodulation and Trio 64, that make up this set. This could have been my first Bill Evans. This may have been my first Bill Evans album that I bought. I'm not even sure. I have so many, but it's possible that this is the first. You see the liner notes that start. Here's the tracks. It's two full albums. One I think one was recorded. One was recorded. The Trio 64 album was recorded December 1963. Obviously, was released in '64. And the Intermodulation duo album with the guitarist Jim Hall, I believe, was 1966. So usually they list right on the back what the albums are and what the recording dates are. And sometimes you've got to dig through, and I've shown this before, all these liner notes to figure out where the sessions are and what. But there's so much history there. So much history, so much good stuff. And just a nice package. I love the cover. I love the historical information, nothing like putting on a slab of vinyl and laying back and having something to read, and you just read about how important or not it was and how representative these particular sessions may or may not have been in the artist's repertoire. This is a Verve. Verve was it seems like there's only a few labels involved, and I don't know what label started it, actually, to be honest with you, in terms of, whose idea it was. But it seems like somebody started it, and very quickly after that, I guess they saw a certain amount of success with it, and they decided to jump on the bandwagon, because I see there's a few jazz labels jumped on this whole idea of the Two-Fers. Excuse me, I'm playing around with the volume on the stereo here. You never know until you play back the videos whether the music's totally too loud or can't be heard at all. But here's a typical thing. You can see it lists that this is a trio session with Paul Motion, Gary Peacock, and a duo with Jim Hall. Beautiful. Perfect example of what they do with the packaging. Love the liner notes. And also, I like having more than, when you pick up a single album, like I said, you may pick up accidentally an album that's not really representative of an artist and not like it and may not explore it further. And in the end, it may be somebody you like. I also like the fact that, obviously, you're getting twice as much music. I always thought, a lot of times, a lot of these albums are in as little as 30 minutes, and they very rarely, especially, these older jazz albums, didn't often exceed 40 minutes even. And I always had much more of a threshold for listening to one artist much longer than that. So it's also nice to have, twice as much material to listen to by an artist. So it's not just over in somewhere between 30 and 40 minutes, but you have over an hour of their stuff in general, if not considerably more, to listen to in one shot to get to know an artist. So I fell in love with the series, and it's been years now, and now looking back in my vinyl bins, like the ones that I seem to treasure the most, I guess, as not just musically, but as packages. Um, the amount of enjoyment that I got out of these, simply because of the amount of detail, just really can't be beat. I just love picking up picking up one of these new albums and just having all that stuff to read about the sessions and everything. Um, So who did it? Well, a bunch of labels did it. Columbia did it to a certain extent. Not much, though. It seems like, well, Columbia's a big label. It seems like it was mostly smaller jazz labels that did it. And Prestige, which is a small jazz label, did it a lot with the early Miles Davis material that they had, and that's the original Miles Davis quintet. But it seems like even Columbia jumped on it a little bit when they did this. Now, this is a little unusual in that here was two albums that were originally released separately, but were recorded at the same live gig. It's Miles Davis in person at the Black Hawk San Francisco. The albums came out individually as Friday night Miles Davis in person at the Black Hawk San Francisco, and Saturday night Miles Davis in person at the Black Hawk San Francisco. So they got smart after having these albums available for over a dozen years. They decided to repackage them together. And now these were all recorded literally. I might even want to say, literally one night after the other. One was Friday night, one was Saturday night. I'm not going into all the history of the sessions, because this has since been reissued on CD with even more material added. I'm really just going into the Two-Fers here. The nice thing about this edition, if you were going to be, like a vinyl purist and you really wanted the original Friday night in San Francisco, Saturday night in San Francisco, is the fact that it has these historical liner notes in there, which the originals didn't have. I think the originals may have had some liner notes, but it was mainly, obviously, talking about it as a new release. These liner notes, more like talking about, written by Ralph J. Gleason, famous jazz writer, really was more like talking historically about the sessions and everything else. And this was a slightly unusual band. It was a very short-lived lineup of Miles with Hank Mobley on tenor saxophone. Hank, which I love, Hank Mobley, and I think this may have been the first time I heard him. He's got a nice round tone, but didn't last long in the band. Wynton Kelly on piano, who played with Miles for a while. Paul Chambers on bass, who played with Miles for a very long time, and Jimmy Cobb on drums. So it's a whole bunch of the kind of blue lineup of musicians, but not exclusively. Hank Mobley did not play with Miles too long, and I loved Hank's very, very warm tone. Really, really liked his playing on this, and it seems to be very underrated. But this was a very simple example of a Two-Fer, because it's very obvious. It's very easy to package these two together. You have two single albums recorded at the same gig. One was one night, one was the other night. Now onto like Prestige, who probably was probably Columbia saw these Prestige repackagings come along, and is probably what made Columbia jump on the bandwagon a little bit. However familiar you are with the Prestige era, the classic Miles Davis quintet, which had John Coltrane on saxophone, Paul Chambers on bass, the very underrated Red Garland on piano, and the great Philly Joe Jones on drums. Sadly, all of them gone now. What was I going to say? Oh, well, they recorded 4 albums kind of back-to-back in the studio, in an extended studio session. They were all released as single albums. One was called Cookin' with the Miles Davis Quintet. One was called Relaxing with the Miles Davis Quintet. One was called Steamin' with the Miles Davis Quartet. And the other one was Workin' with the Miles Davis Quartet. They were all pretty much recorded in the same marathon studio session, but released over as individual albums. And then Prestige, after being available for many, many years, let me see if I can find the date on when they did this Two-Fer. Yeah, I don't see it on here. Sometimes you get it on the vinyl itself. So I'll show you a little bit what the vinyls look like. Nice green Prestige label for this one. 1972. So that's which is pretty much when these started. I think I don't recall seeing Two-Fers go back much more than 72. So this one was, those 4 albums, the Workin', Steamin', Cookin' and Smokin' or whatever it was with the Miles Davis Quintet, Relaxing, came out as individuals, were available as individual albums, and then Prestige got the idea, well, let's package these together. And they did, as two separate Two-Fers. So this particular one has Cookin' with the Miles Davis Quintet and Relaxing with the Miles Davis Quintet. This next one, which is, it's a very early 70s type style picture of Miles, but the sessions were from the mid 50s, I think 56. So, you could look at this and think that, oh, Miles put out a new album. Look at that. That's his early 70s look just before he retired for about 5 years. But in fact, the sessions are the old Miles Davis Quintet with John Coltrane, Red Garland, Paul Chambers, and Philly Joe Jones. So this duo, this Two-Fer, had Workin' with the Miles Davis Quintet and Steamin' with the Miles Davis Quintet. Yeah, recorded in May 56 and October 56. Those were 2 marathon sessions that they recorded the material for 4 studio albums. And all these studio albums were released individually. Paul Chambers on bass. Coltrane, Red Garland, Miles. Philly Joe. You see Philly Joe up there? Yeah, there you go, my man. Oh, I love Philly Joe. And there's some historical stuff in there, too, obviously. So, in a way, these Two-Fers, for me anyway, got a bit of an advantage to, the single editions because of those liner notes, because of that history. I have a lot of Miles Davis. And I went through my bins. Excuse me, I'm trying to fart around the volume on my stereo here. I went through my bins. I think I found most of my Two-Fers, but it seems like I can remember going to the record store and getting really excited when I came home with a Two-Fer, just hoping that they had liner notes, because there were a rare occasion that there wasn't much liner notes in some of them. Here's another Miles Davis collector's items. This is real early stuff. This is earlier stuff before he even formed the quintet with John Coltrane and Red Garland and all those guys. These were things he did with Charlie Parker even. Now, one of these, confusingly, one of the albums that were included on here was actually called Collector's Items. So unless you looked closely at it, you might think that this was a repackaging, obviously with a different cover, of that original Collector's Items album. But, when you saw that it was two vinyls in here, obviously there's other stuff here too. This one was a little weird because it had the full album of the Collector's Items, and also had a few, an EP that was about 20, 25, 26 minutes, called Blue Moods. And so what they did is, because the EP wasn't a full album length, they included the full EP on here. But they also included 2 additional tracks from another source. So in a way, you could say it's a compilation. But the whole idea is they did take 2 previous albums, but one of them was so short that they included a couple additional tracks from another source. That's not a complete album. But they have, basically 1 complete EP, 1 complete album, and 2 additional tracks from another source. But the dates of recording, 55, 51, and 53, 56. So 51, 53, 55, and 56. This was a nice one. I really like this. Very kind of warm, early jazz. Obviously real early stuff. I mean, it starts to skirt along the later 50s, the mid to late 50s was at the point that Miles did have the quintet established. But most of the stuff comes from two earlier sessions from before the quintet, so it's real early Miles. But nice stuff, very old timey fashion, but nice stuff. Here's another one, Tune Up. And you notice, like, these are all pictures of Miles, late 60s, early 70s when these came out, which don't really represent so much the music that's in here. This one is another collection of early 50s stuff. Let's see. I'm just reading. I hope you don't mind. I'm trying to find out what albums these were initially released on, but they're not listing it. Here we go. This one again is maybe a little different because they're going back to stuff that's so early. Again, 53, 54. Most of the stuff is actually from 1953 and 54 on here, but they're going back to the days. And by the way, this was compiled in 77. They're going back to the days of the 10-inch LPs. So you're going to have more than just 2 LPs worth of stuff on here. So a few of these, I have a couple of these that go back so far that they're actually gathering together several 10-inch LPs, which were like mini LPs. So this one has a 10-inch LP that was just called, it was so early, it was just called Miles Davis. That was the entire title of the thing. Another 10-inch LP was called the Miles Davis Quintet. There's one called Miles Davis Sextet. All three of those apparently were 10-inch LPs, so miniature LPs essentially. And wow, a couple tracks. I mentioned this in my last video. A couple tracks that had previously been unissued. They were alternate takes of tunes that had been issued previously, but they were different takes of those tunes. So they kind of rounded out this. So you got 3 10-inches on here, 3 10-inch LPs on here, as well as some previously unreleased stuff, which I mentioned in my last video. I only know a couple of occasions, and one of them was West Montgomery, where they gathered the material of 2 albums and then threw in like one bonus track of something that had been previously unreleased. So this is maybe a little bit of a mishmash, but the sessions are very close together, 53 and 54, and comprise the 10-inch mini LPs that were apparently popular then. And did 3 of those, threw in a handful of extra tracks, including a couple that had not been previously released. Yeah, first issuance, the alternate takes. A couple tracks. Yeah, now these have all been issued since. Those alternate takes, tracks, takes of older tracks have all been issued, reissued back on CD and stuff. You get the history in there. A lot of stuff to read. And a lot of musicians on here. Art Blakey, Kenny Clark, Percy Heath, Milt Jackson, J.J. Johnson, John Lewis, Thelonious Monk, Max Roach. So this is a nice Sonny Rollins, Horace Silver. So this is kind of a nice early Miles before he had an established band, really. And here's one of my favorite reissue albums. Some of those, like the last few album covers I've showed you, not that great, maybe. But here's a really nice. I want to say I showed this on a video. Did I show it on a video I did of covers I like or something like that? It's called Miles Davis Tallest Trees. Love the artwork on this, especially the back, the moon in the back. But again, it's kind of made to look like the liner notes aren't quite as bountiful in this one, but they're there. They're still there. But when was this compiled? It's weird that I can't find. I have to pull out one of the albums to look for a copyright date on there. 1972. So another Two-Fer. I guess 1972. I don't recall seeing anything that went back further than that. Seemed to be when the Two-Fer started. And this was a. This looks like it was 3 different sessions, and I want to say they don't specifically state that they're mini LPs on this, but they may have been, or they were just very short LPs that because they stuck 3 sessions on here. Blue Haze, and I have I could have looked all these up, but there's so many of them. I have all of these on CD in the original when they repackaged them again. As CDs, the original running time, and so you get a lot of like 30-minute albums and stuff like that in there. And I have all these, but I didn't go to check the length. Blue Haze was one of them, which is a really good early Miles that I like. Bag's Groove, which was pretty much a Christmas Eve session recorded right in the next town to where I grew up, in Hackensack by Rudy Van Gelder on, I want to say it was 1954. I think it was 1954 on Christmas Eve with Thelonious Monk. It was a very famous session, which I loved reading about. And one of the places I think I read about the session, I've read it in numerous places over the years about the famous Christmas Eve session with Thelonious Monk and Miles Davis. One of the places I did read about it was in one of these liner notes in one of these Two-Fers. And Miles Davis and the Jazz Giants, which was another very short album of his that had some additional material from that Christmas Eve session and a couple leftover tracks. So it looks like this one basically compiled about 3 shorter albums by Miles again, but I believe they're complete. I mean, all those albums have come out since in their original incarnation, the way they originally came out, format-wise. But this is just such a great place to learn about these sessions and to get into them. And every once in a while, you get a gem like this cover to go with it. Well, I decided I didn't have enough Miles Davis, so I went out and put another one. This is it's not Prestige. It's Fantasy, Fantasy label. Okay, anyway, what Miles Davis dig? More early stuff. Odd cover. Kind of cool in its own way. Maybe not one you'd hang up on the wall. Kind of cool. Continuation of that in the back. Another session. The early Miles with this is again was prior to him forming his first great quintet with Coltrane. This is Walter Bishop and Art Blakey, Kenny Clark on drums, Al Cohn, Benny Green, Roy Haynes on drums, Percy Heath on bass, Jackie McLean and Sonny Rollins on saxophones, and John Lewis on piano. Another collection of early Miles stuff. Two actual albums on here. One of them was called Early Miles, previously came out as a single album, and one was called Conception. And so they have these two sessions, these 2 complete albums on here. It doesn't seem so much like it was thrown together stuff. Like there was one or 2 of them that had a bunch of cherry picked things. But yeah, this is early. This is one of the ones. I was thinking one of the other ones was from 51. It's this one, 1951. So the sessions here are one session from January 51, one session from October 51, and a February 1953 session that made up these 2 prior albums called Early Miles and Conception. Fantasy Records. Wow. I thought everything was on Prestige. That was the Two-Fers for him. Oh, look at this. I almost didn't pull this out. Blowing Our Own Horn. Fantasy Prestige Milestone Two-Fers. How odd. And I haven't even been pulling out the vinyl, to look. And I didn't even remember. It's been years since I opened this. Specially priced 2 record sets. And there's the milestone listing as of the date that this album came out anyway. the prestige stuff, the fantasy stuff. Now I'm finding the ones that I missed. Cal Jader, who I love. Ravi Shankar, wow. Leadbelly, Tom Rush. They got some guys. Oh yeah, fantasy was big on other types of music besides jazz too. Look at those Miles Davis, the Prestige stuff. I want to say Prestige probably did Two-Fers on their entire Miles Davis catalog, because Miles left for Columbia in the late 50s. Yeah, it had to be sometime in the late 50s, 56 or 57 or so. But had recorded a lot of sessions for Prestige. And I want to say probably everything Miles recorded for Prestige came out on the Two-Fer at some point. But how cool is that? I don't even remember that being in there. Maybe I should open these more often. Maybe I'll find the receipt. Like, I love to stash the receipts in these records to help jog my memory when I bought them. Yeah, same thing. Other album, same thing. Let's see. Mongo Santa Maria they did. John Coltrane they did Two-Fers for. Cal Jader. Charles Mingus. A couple I'm not going to mention because I'm going to show them. Wow. I didn't remember seeing the Cal Jader ones. Or else I probably would have picked them up. I got a lot of Cal Jader single LPs. So that's really when I was not my first Miles. I remember my first Miles album was actually Circling Around, which came out in 1979, but was a kind of a compilation of all previously unreleased tracks that spanned a period of 20 years or more. So it wasn't my first Miles, but very shortly after, these became the next Miles things that I picked up and got into his history, in a fairly inexpensive way. Probably the best way to do it, because you don't have just the albums with no liner notes. You've got the liner notes, which give you the history there. So there's all the history as to these sessions, and these are the old sessions. These are the 1951 sessions. Wow. Believe it or not, I don't have any more Miles Davis. Here's a couple that I particularly like. Dave Brubeck. Dave Brubeck Trio. These are old sessions. I don't know if they didn't do the timeout and so much the real popular Dave Brubeck stuff era. It seems like the only ones that I saw were much earlier things. This one is Fantasy. I think this is Fantasy Records. Yeah, I think it's Fantasy. I'll have to pull out the album and say, I guess. Yeah, Fantasy. Fantasy Records. This is before the establishment of the quartet with Paul Desmond on saxophone. This album contains. A lot of people probably weren't even aware of this trio that Brubeck had before the quartet that was so popular. This stuff was recorded. I know 50 and 1950 and 51, but I want to say I thought there was a session from 1949 in here as well. But it looks like they're both sessions 1950 and 51. That's a long time ago. But listen to the band. If you're not familiar with the trio that Dave Brubeck had, he had a guy named Ron Crotty on bass, Crotty, but he had Cal Jader on drums and vibraphone, mostly playing drums. The Cal Jader started out as a musical associate with Dave Brubeck. Pianist Dave Brubeck, if I need to say that. And I totally didn't know about the trio at all. And what this is this is 3 10-inch LPs. So it seems like the 10-inch LPs were probably fairly popular at the time. And I guess it was kind of like a nice, lesser expensive alternate to, I guess, a full 12-inch LP. You know, and obviously more information than you would get on a single, on a 7-inch single. So apparently, 10-inch LPs were very popular, and in 50 and 51, these guys recorded 3 of them, and this Two-Fer collects all 3 of those 10-inch LPs. And there's a little picture. I don't know how well you could see it with the glare and everything. There's a picture of the original 10-inch LPs. The first one used the same cover as the third one. The only difference was slight background color change. And then the middle one, the middle 10-inch LP, was the same picture that they used on the cover here. Obviously, very young Dave Brubeck trio. Hell of a band, though. Cal Tjader, wow. Nice. San Francisco Bay Area, early jazz, 1950, 51. You know, these three 10-inch LPs packaged together, and of course the copious liner notes that I love so much. Love that. Look at Cal Tjader on drums. Man, you know, just what's better? I don't know if there's anything better, like on a Friday night, than going to the record store and buying, you know, a bunch of new vinyl and having something to read along with it. You know, so preferable one of the vinyls you buy is a nice Two-Fer, and you've got something to read. My only other Dave Brubeck, which is another early one, I think, is The Art of Dave Brubeck, The Fantasy Years. I love this cover because this is obviously, even though it came out in the 70s, a very 60s-ish kind of design. Let's see when this Two-Fer came out. Oh, it's got an Atlantic label. Atlantic Fantasy Years. It doesn't say. Maybe it'll say inside. This one again was prior to Dave Brubeck's famous quartet. You know, with Paul Desmond on sax. And this one has 2 LPs in here, 2 live albums actually. One was called Jazz at Oberlin, and I've seen both of these released individually. And one is called Jazz at College of the Pacific, or Jazz at College of Pacific. And these are early, prior to his famous quartet. Jazz at Oberlin, Jazz at College of Pacific. The Oberlin College one was recorded March 2nd, 1953. And the College of Pacific album was recorded December 14th, 1953. So 2 live albums that were individually released, packaged together, all from the same year. About, 9 months apart? 6 months apart? 7 months apart? 8 months? I don't know. You do the counting. One's March, one's December. So I guess about 9 months apart. Yeah, so, you know, I think it was pretty much after these, you know, it was after 53 that he formed this famous quartet. And, you know, the history there, liner notes again, wonderful, wonderful liner notes, something to read. Yeah, so, and I know that this is not one of the original covers, so it's kind of cool that it's, even though it came out in the 70s, it's got a kind of 60s pop artish thing, which I love. But I know this was a 70-something reissue. And I'm looking at the spine. The list price was $7.98. Generally, the stores that I bought from, they generally knock $1 off of the list price, so at least $1. So this would have probably been like a $6.98 purchase. New. Awesome. And good early stuff. Now, I don't know to what extent you can hear the stuff in the background, but I've been playing exclusively, but from various album sources, Yusef Lateef. Now, gathering up this vinyl stuff for this video made me want to hear Yusef Lateef even more. I only have the stuff from the 80s on CD of his, and you know, came on YouTube's got a million things of his. And but I haven't played these vinyls in years. And now I want to go back. Now I want to go back to the 50s and early 60s and pick up some of his stuff on CD. Lovely tone, played flute lovely, and I really want to get the flute stuff. The flute stuff by him is fantastic. But this is my first, I have 2 of these, my first 2 purchases of Yusef Lateef albums. Didn't know where to go, didn't want to buy a single disc. So I bought these, and oddly enough, recorded in Hackensack, New Jersey, right next to where I lived, blocks from where I lived, in October 9th and 10th, 1957. So this would have been done by Rudy Van Gelder. I know by the address that Rudy Van Gelder recorded it. So these was apparently, there was another, Yusef did marathon sessions. And, well, I found in the liner notes. I'm going to read part of these. Beginning in 1957, Latif and his group made periodic trips east to record. They didn't land a gig in New York until 1959, engagement at the Half Note. We would all pile into a car on Friday, Latif recalls, drive from Detroit to Rudy Van Gelder's studio in New Jersey, record, and get back in the car for the trip home Sunday. So let me see. October 57th, in October 57, they did enough recording on one of these weekends, or not one of these weekends, it might have been more than one weekend, but it was all on October 57th, to turn out 4 albums worth of material. Oh yeah, and one in 3 days at Van Gelder's. So in a 3-day long weekend, they recorded enough material for 4 albums, and they put that material out on Two-Fers after releasing all 4 albums individually. So this is a gathering together of 2 out of those 4 albums material, recorded October 9th and 10th, 1957. Interesting. Very nice round tone to it. I really like his sound on the horn. He played, in the early days, he's pretty much sax and flute. As time went on, he got into the 60s, he started adding ethnic wind instruments as well to his arsenal. And it's all worth hearing. I love his tone on saxophone because it's soft and it's not harsh at all. But I got to say, my favorite thing is to hear him play flute. And he just passed away a few years ago, not that long ago. Long career, a lot of albums. But again, I knew nothing, absolutely nothing about Latif. And this is my introduction. Actually, here's an oddity. The liner notes actually start here. I know you can't see them, but the liner notes start up there and are continued inside. Instead, they used to pretty much start them on the back of the album. And then they did these sideways, which makes it hard to read. But yeah, a lot of historic stuff. And I guess it means a little bit to me that the place that I grew up and lived my first 53 years of my life, so many of these classic albums were recorded, blocks away from where I lived. And I only have one other Latif Two-Fer, and that's this one, called Yusef's Bag. This is going a lot longer than I thought it would. The first album in here was actually released as a Doug Watkins, who's one of the players on the album, as one of his own albums that Yusef played on. The interesting thing is, of the 6 tracks on the album, Doug Watkins only wrote one of them, and Yusef Latif actually wrote 2 of them. So it's at least as much of a Yusef Latif album as it is a Doug Watkins album. And in fact, it was first released as a Doug Watkins album, then got re-released as a single disc as a Yusef Latif Imagination. So it was re-released as a Yusef Latif album, and then gathered together here in this Two-Fer. And oddly, for these Two-Fers, the second album in here is actually a bit of a compilation drawn from 3 different albums. So the first album is a complete album that was originally the Doug Watkins album. And then the second album, which is not something he did a whole hell of a lot of, was actually compiled from the first album, let me see, was from May 1960. The second album was actually a bit cherry-picked from 3 different sessions in 1957, 1959, and 1961, which is not something that they did a whole lot. So you have one kind of complete album as originally issued, and then the second one was a bit of a compilation thrown together from three different sources. But still, it's a good way to sample somebody, to have at least two albums or more of material from different sessions, rather than just buying one album that it might not be, like I said, representative of their work. Here's the one guy that I know I have more Two-Fers of that I didn't find, but Eric Dolphy. I have a lot of single albums by him, and I don't know where I started. I have a lot of single albums by him, vinyl albums, so I can't recall where I started with Eric Dolphy. It may have been with the Two-Fers. This is Prestige Fantasy Records, there was a series of live albums that he did that were released in 3 volumes, all individual albums, recorded in September 1961 in Copenhagen, Denmark, with Chuck Israels on bass, Benny Axon on piano, Jorn Elnif on drums. They got a second bass player listed here, and it's only on 2. I got a second bass player listed here, and it looks like, I don't know, these were all recorded at the same time, so I don't know if they switched bass players one night. Eric Mosholm on bass on one of the albums in here, and Chuck Israels on bass on the other. And yet these were all recorded in the same trip, they only list one session here too, so it's a bit weird that they would have 2 bass players. I'd have to read all the liner notes. But anyway, there was 2 individual albums on here: Eric Dolphy in Europe, Volume 1, and Eric Dolphy Volume 3. It says both were recorded September 1961 in Denmark. So these were basically live albums, 2 individual live albums gathered together. I remember liking these really well, and I'm so lazy to pull out my vinyl. But I think these 1961 live albums are going to be things that I know they've been repackaged together since. I'm going to probably get those. My other Eric Dolphy Two-Fer contains contains the other album. I just got lost listening to the music for a second there. One of the albums in here is Eric Dolphy in Europe, Volume 2. If you remember, that first one had Eric Dolphy in Europe, Volume 1 and 3. I don't know why they didn't put 1 and 2 together. Why they put 1 and 3 together, and then they put 2 in with a completely different Eric Dolphy album. But this one has Eric Dolphy in Europe, Volume 2. And once again, was recorded September 1961 in Denmark. And the first album, which I also have as an individual album, is an album called Here and There by Eric Dolphy. Where's the recording dates for those? Segment number 2. Yeah, I don't know. Looks like there's a couple different sessions on the Here and There album. April 1960, recorded in Hackensack once again. And yet there's like 3 different bands on here, and something recorded in 61 too. So it looks like the Here and There album, which I would have to really look at, was recorded at some different sessions and compiled into an album later. And then you have that third volume, which is actually, in this case, Volume 2 of the Eric Dolphy in Europe. And I remember liking these all very much. I don't remember the Here and There album being from different sessions, though. and apparently they've got a whole bunch of different musicians recorded at different dates. And that live album was all recorded in one session, so I'm a little confused. I don't recall the Here and There album being recorded 2 different sessions. But that's my other Eric Dolphy Two-Fer, and I have many actual more single vinyl albums by him as well. But again, you know, you can see that detailed liner notes galore. Love this, love this. Just nothing better than putting on a slab of vinyl and sitting back and listening to those. I have one and only one, George Benson, or early George Benson when he was playing with Jack McDuff. Again, this would have been early 70s if this came out. And I think one of the albums in here was originally issued as the new boss guitar of George Benson, one of his first, if not his first, solo albums. And the second album is called Brother Jack McDuff Hot Barbecue, which is an album that George Benson played on as well as a member of his band. This came out in 77. It's a compilation. Very raw, kind of poor quality recordings, I seem to remember. I love that guitar. I love those big hollow body guitars, though. A lot more picture there than there is liner notes, though. And we get on to now this I remember. My very first Wes Montgomery album I ever bought was a Two-Fer, as this one, the small group recordings. Oddly enough, and I have probably 95% of his discography. Remains my favorite. My favorite sessions of his. This was originally released as... Oh, wait a minute. I got to change my music here. Hold on. Hold on, guys. This is very important. Or else, like, you know, because I'm trying to pull stuff up that suits the mood here and not have something like Black Sabbath come up or something, you know. I don't know if I'm going to be able to do it without hanging you guys up for 5 minutes. Okay, trying to get more Yusef on the background. I don't know if it's going to work. Small group recordings. Slightly interesting history. This is one of those albums. I know these sessions so well. Again, recorded in New Jersey. Some of the studio stuff anyway. This is a very famous album for him, recorded on the Verve label. Most of it is live recordings taken from a New York City club performance in September of 1965, and also... Well, let me see. September recorded... Okay, actually, here's how it goes. May and June 1965, there's an album full of live stuff, which is amongst my favorite recordings of Wes ever. A great band. It was Miles Davis's band at the time on their day off. Wynton Kelly on piano, Paul Chambers on bass, and Jimmy Cobb on drums. So this would have been roughly the Kind of Blue period. And Wes on guitar. And there's one album here of live stuff. And oddly enough, when the album came out in its original single disc compilation, whatever you want to call it, or the single disc that came out, in some cases they after the fact added some horn charts to make the music sound more fuller or whatever, I don't know. And there's nothing wrong with the original stuff. Well, this is the first time that they actually stripped off the horn charts that were on there, leaving just the live stuff as it was. So in a way, this isn't so much, it's partially a reissue, but partially really restoring things back to the way it was when it was performed live in the club. The second disc on here has some studio material recorded roughly at the same time, September 65, with exactly the same band. Wes Montgomery on guitar, Wynton Kelly on piano, called Chambers Bass, Jimmy Cobb on drums. And again, my thing is going where I don't want it to go. And so that was the studio. There's a side of studio stuff, which apparently about this 20 minutes was about all they recorded in the studio at this time. And then they kind of threw on these two sessions with Jimmy Smith on organ from September of '66, also recorded in Jersey, with Grady Tate on drums and Ray Barretto on percussion, Jimmy Smith on organ. And those two tracks that make up just the fourth side were actually pulled from a full-length album. So again, you have kind of a weird two-fer here, because it's like one full album and then a bunch of tracks for the second disc that were kind of pulled from different sources. But really, there's not a bum tune on here. And a lot of liner notes, as you can see, they start in the back. This was my favorite West for a long time. Actually, probably still is. A lot of liner notes. It came out in '76. I probably bought it in '78, I want to say. I don't belabor the point. I got a lot of West stuff. Pretty Blue. Another West. This is a Fantasy album. I want to say this one is a bit more unusual in that, well, it's good as a twofer, because the first album that's featured on here was an album called Fusion. Fusion back in the '60s they're not talking about rock, jazz rock fusion. It's actually the first album that West ever recorded with strings in the background. It was during this time with Verve Records that they started making things other than just pure jazz albums with a lot of improvisation. And they decided to, for the first time, record Wes with backing strings. And so they did this album called Fusion, which is originally what it was called as a single disc, and it's out there on CD now, again, as Fusion. All these have come out in the original format. So the Fusion album on here. And again, the second album is stuff cherry-picked. From Wes Montgomery's trio albums. They cherry-picked. The second album is from, let me see, 1, 2, 3, 4 different, is selections cherry-picked from 4 different Wes Montgomery albums, but all of them recorded in an organ trio with Wes on guitar, Melvin Rhine, or is it Mel Rhine? Melvin Rhine on organ, and a bunch of different drummers. The drummer was always changing in the band. But it was all organ trio stuff, 4 different albums, all of which I own and I love. So, one's kind of like a compilation of his organ trios. The other one's his full Fusion album, titled Fusion, not Rock Fusion. And Jimmy Cobb is one of the drummers on some of the organ material. But really good stuff. This was, the string stuff, definitely veers toward easy listening maybe. And again, copious liner notes. But I loved it. I can appreciate that stuff, especially even more now that I'm old. Another one, Yesterdays. Another West Two-Fer. I'm a sucker for two-fers. Wow, this might be the latest. This is probably one of the later, 1980. One of the later two-fers I have. This one is almost entirely a compilation, oddly enough. The entire first side is actually taken from one album. An entire second side was taken from another album. And they threw in a few different previously unreleased tracks, oddly enough. So I don't think there's probably no complete albums on here, which is quite unusual. Dates from 1959 to 1963. But again, interestingly, this is all organ trio stuff. So it's all Wes Montgomery with Melvin Ryan on organ and various drummers that they used, including Jimmy Cobb. So it's a bit of that last album I showed that also cherry picked some of the organ trio tracks. Probably between these two albums, you probably have several full, complete albums of the organ trio material. But strange that they didn't. There's no complete albums on here. It's basically they should have maybe called it like his organ trio, Wes's organ trio, through the years or something. A lot of liner notes, but I love Wes's organ trios. Very, very mellow, but there's just something about that sound I like. And I have next a Wes Montgomery album, big surprise, called While We're Young. I want to say, from what I remember, Orrin Keepnews, the big deal guy, I think he passed away recently. He used to write a lot of jazz producer, used to write liner notes on occasion. This is two full albums. The Incredible Jazz Guitar of Wes Montgomery, an early solo album of his from 1960, recorded January 1960. And the second album is called So Much Guitar, another full album, recorded in 61. So going back to the Two-Fer, the original kind of the original intention of them kind of packaging two full albums together. Liner notes, pictures of Wes. Good sessions though. Tommy Flanagan on piano, Percy Heath on bass, Albert Heath on drums on the one album, Hank Jones on piano on the second album, Ron Carter on bass, Lex Humphreys on drums, and Ray Barretto does on congas. I remember liking this really a lot. Until I read these, I tend to forget what albums and what sessions are included in here. I don't think there's one I don't like, though, let's be honest. But that goes kind of back to the original idea of packaging two albums together. Another Wes, this guy Wes Montgomery keeps popping up. 1977 Two-Fer compilation called Movin'. I know this has at least one full album on here. It has originally an album called Moving Along, which is a pretty popular album by his. And again, this is two full albums, and Full House, another one. Moving Along was an album, again, early in his career, from recorded October 12th, 1960. James Clay on flute, Victor Feldman on piano, Sam Jones on bass, Louis Haynes on drums. Wow. Side 3 and 4, which is the Moving Along album, Full House album, is a live album recorded in California, January 25, 1962. Johnny Griffin on tenor sax, Wynton Kelly on piano, played Wes a lot, Paul Chambers on bass, Jimmy Cobb on drums, the same guys as that played in the small group session album that I showed you. They played with Wes a lot. They apparently liked working with Wes. It's the same exact trio that backed him up in New York in 1965. Except with Johnny Griffin on tenor sax. And oddly, because not that I don't like Johnny Griffin's playing, but because Johnny's there, it gives less solo time for Wes. So it's a really good album, but I would have been happy, without the saxophone there, and give more solo time to Wes instead of dividing it amongst the piano, the saxophone, and the guitar. Liner notes, copious liner notes. I don't know why I remember listening to this one so much. It was one of the rare, most of the ones I have by Wes don't have sax on them. So maybe that's why. It has something to do with that, that aspect of it. I don't recall. There's not a lot of saxophone in Wes Montgomery recordings. And Wes Montgomery Beginnings. Blue Note. This is a Blue Note Two-Fer. I don't know how much Blue Note got into the Two-Fers. This is more like a jumping on the bandwagon kind of thing. And this is almost entirely a compilation album. I got to change my thing again. Hold on. These are dates that some of them weren't even recorded as Wes Montgomery as leader things. They were things he recorded with his brothers group, the Master. I don't know if they were called the Master Sounds then, or they were called the Montgomery Brothers. I think they were called the Master Sounds. That Wes's musician brothers formed, the band that they had formed prior to Wes even really starting to play out. And Wes joined them on occasion. And what they did is I think they selected some various sessions that Wes recorded with them, but not a full album. Because, I mean, Wes's first album as a leader came out was recorded in 59. These dates are from 1957 and 58, and a little bit going into 59. But it's all different sessions, all different musicians. So more of a compilation Two-Fer. And his sound here is a little bit different in the early stuff, a little bit different than what he got known for. In 59, he was still working on the sound a little bit. But for a long time, these were the earliest, and these are culled from different sources, and some of them, like I said, not necessarily Wes Montgomery albums. They were Wes playing with other folks, and his tracks with other folks. Mostly his brothers, I think. Yeah, the Master Sounds. I would have to read the details as to who these sessions were. I know most of the sessions were his brothers, but they could be other jazz musicians as well. His two brothers, Monk and Buddy, gained national reputation with the group the Master Sounds, blah, blah, blah. So they were actually going long before Wes was going on his own. So this is essentially a compilation. For a long time, this was the earliest Wes Montgomery material available. But in the last recent years, in the compact disc era, they actually discovered a couple things, some sessions that Wes did for somebody else, not on his own albums, that predated his first album in 59 as a leader, as well as some little tiny small club gigs that he played in Indianapolis, where he's from, that just came like within the last few months. Somebody had located the tapes a while ago, but just released these early club performances that predated his first album, before anybody even knew that these recordings were made. Here's my last one. Here's Verve jumping on the gun a little bit with probably the poorest Two-Fer. When was this put together? 74. This one is a almost entirely a compilation of Wes's closer to pop stuff. When he went to Verve, he started recording in the pure jazz thing, and then he did that fusion album with strings, and then he started doing other albums, not only with a little strings in the backing and charts and stuff like that, written by people like Don Sebesky, but also doing shorter songs, and also doing, on occasion, mixed in his albums, instrumental version of pop tunes. And this Two-Fer was essentially kind of thrown together, I think, of his more pop stuff during the Verve era. He left Verve and then went to A&M Records, where he recorded only pop stuff. Pretty much, instrumental, very short tunes, very heavily arranged. But as opposed to the other albums, which were his more pure jazz stuff, this compilation kind of focused on Verve as well, but this focused on a lot of the more popular stuff. He actually had a hit single with the song Going Out of My Head, an instrumental version of that. I don't know if anybody remembers the Letterman, but they had a big hit with the record in the 60s. And that song Tequila, that Wes had a minor hit with, doing his own jazzy version of that. So there's some of that is on this record. California Dreaming is on here. What the World Needs Now is Love. But of course, there's jazz stuff on here. Willow Weep for Me. Here's That Rainy Day. Around Midnight. Impressions. West Coast Blues. Bumpin', which is his own track, and Bumpin' on Sunset, which is another track of his. So they kind of mixed a little bit of the poppy stuff and the stuff with arrangements on here. But this particular album features a bit a bit more the direction of the shorter songs, but they really cheaped out on this. This is the one big disappointment. No liner notes at all. They just, a big ass picture of his face, and then the same damn thing that's on the cover, these geometric shapes or whatever. So this is the only little tiny. That's it for the liner notes, guys. Not much. They don't even list recording dates. They just tell you that the stuff was previously released, but they don't even tell you what the albums are that it's taken from. So, a good sampling of maybe his more pop stuff if you didn't want to go out and buy a whole album at the time. But not one of the shining examples of how great Two-Fers can be. And the Two-Fers went pretty much until, I want to say until about 19... I bought a lot of them in the early 80s, but that doesn't mean they were new back then. I know they went into at least 1980. Oddly enough, the thing that killed the Two-Fers was not compact disc, which would have killed them a few years down the road, but somebody coming up with the idea of repackaging those original album sessions with the original cover art. Because now, at this point, when you get into the early 80s, those original albums had been out of print for many years, and the ones that were in print were as Two-Fers with different updated covers and things like that. The odd thing was, you would never think this would work, but I can remember reading an article less than a year into this reissue of the original albums with the original artwork, saying that these records were selling like pop records. It was cool that people were, and I got to admit, me too, I was one of them, were able to go and to buy these albums just like you were in a record store in 1950, whatever, buying them with the original covers. And the only bad thing with that is obviously the price was not great because now you're buying individual albums again and paying for them. And of course, you don't have the historic liner notes. But you get the vibe of the original album. And this is one that I've shown before. This is one of the ones, these sessions here, I have on the Two-Fers already. But there you go. There's that beautiful cover. And this edition, which I know it's not even open, it's still sealed. You can tell by the font that this is not something that was made in the 70s or 80s, that this is the font that was from the 50s. And they just released it exactly as it was. I don't even see on the spine you can see a date that says 1982. But that's the only thing that you can see on there that gives away, and the fact that it's got OJC as the catalog number, and not just Prestige. But I got to admit, I love some of those. I love the fact that it captures the vibe of the times. It was just like I walked into a record store in 1953 or 54, whenever this came out, the original album, and bought this album. I've showed these before. My OJCs of the original jazz classics, of Howard Rumsey's Lighthouse All-Stars. Again, these were albums that I don't recall whether the All-Stars stuff was released as Two-Fers. I know I never saw them. But, this is from the 80s again, using all that original font and everything. And this one came out in 1984. So this is kind of what the Two-Fers morphed into. I mean, they were reasonably priced, $5.98, but you still got more of a bargain with the Two-Fers. Another one, I just love these covers. Sunday Jazz a la Lighthouse. The price went up $6.98. Last 10 seconds, it went up by $1. And this was $84. So they jacked up the price by $1 from $5.98 to $6.98 as a list price in 1984. But yeah, I love the fact, you do get a little bit of history with the strips on here. That's the only thing that is updated on them. But I very much appreciate the fact that they have the flavor of the period that they came out in. That's Howard Rumsey himself, who's still alive right now. And again, the liner, thankfully, at least there are. It's funny to read the liner notes because they reproduced the liner notes exactly as they were. And here it is, 1984 or so when this came out. Yes, one doesn't have a date on it, but it was definitely the 80s. And you're reading liner notes that were written in contemporary times, in modern times, Howard Rumsey's blah, blah, blah. And this was written in 1957. And, they're talking, like nothing happened after 1957. So the liner notes of the original Howard Rumsey's Lighthouse, well, which is pretty much gone by that point. Here's a great one that I really like. Let me do the music. Early Dave Brubeck, OJC, which this stuff even predates those old sessions with the trio that I showed you that compiled the 10-inch albums. This was earlier than that. Dave Brubeck apparently starts with one of the first things he had was an octet. And Cal Tjader was in the octet as well. Bill Smith is clarinetist, you may have heard of. Who else? Dick Collins, Dave Van Kryth. Yeah, but Cal Tjader, Dick Collins, Paul Desmond. Paul Desmond was in here. And this is oddly enough even before his trio, which didn't include Paul Desmond. But apparently he called back on... You may have known Paul Desmond from college, because I think that's when these sessions were together. But that kind of, that's very, very hip artwork. And this is, like 1949 or 50. This is old stuff. 49 or 50. It definitely has an old sound. I love that cartoon though. So I can see why, the OJC stuff, the original jazz classic. I just grabbed a few of them. Here's one I bought just because the cover was so cool. Thelonious Monk Quartet. Again, this was something that was available as a Two-Fer. And then they, reissued it in the 80s with the original artwork and the original liner notes and everything. But but you can see with some of this artwork, you can see why these were popular. They really catch. Paul Desmond Quartet. This is an album I didn't even know existed. I don't know if this is available on Two-Fer, but this is just another, showing that the OJC is the original jazz classics, the repackaging of those original albums with the original artwork and the original liner notes and everything, are just really the thing that maybe killed the Two-Fers. And, some fantastic music. And again, $5.98 list price. And this was 84. So then, those continued until the CD came out and basically put a kibosh on the whole, Two-Fer thing and even the OJC thing, even though a lot of those albums have come out, pretty much in their original format on CD, very much like the OJC stuff. So I just thought I'd do a little history lesson. And like a history lesson, you could fall asleep while I'm giving it. Okay, guys, I went much longer than I intended to, once again. 78 minutes and counting. So I'm sorry for going on so long. I thought this would be under an hour. I don't know why. I thought maybe 45 minutes. But anyway, thanks for watching. I hope there's something interesting in there for you. I probably don't have a lot of other Two-Fers to show. And I hope everyone's doing well. And whenever you see this, I hope everything's going great for you. And I will be back soon. Good night.